This episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra is perfect for more than just the summer heat this year, because not only is it refreshing and crisp with only 95 calories, but Ultra is also the official beer sponsor of Team USA at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Celebrate every point, race, and moment with Team USA and Michelob Ultra for the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Stock up on Michelob Ultra and cheer on Team USA. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2024 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Hello there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 641 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. It is Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. The Olympics are still going on. We're in the final days of the Olympics as I speak. Women's basketball is on right now. Shout out the point guard, Chelsea Gray, and coach Carol Lawson, who are on the bench right now. But we're here to talk some Duke basketball. We have some Duke football. We have some Duke adjacent stuff to discuss. But before we get into all that, I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. My normal co-host, Jason Evans, is on vacation, which is fine. People can take vacations, but he did not invite me on said vacation, so I'm a little upset. Joking. I will probably go on vacation soon and be the same thing. But he is out right now. But thankfully, our cleanup hitter, Scott Rich, is in the building. Scott, how you doing, man?
I think I'm more of a pinch hitter. I think I'm more of the last guy off the bench pinch hitter as opposed to the all important cleanup hitter. But I appreciate the amp up nonetheless.
Hey, when you are in the lineup, you are in the lineup. It doesn't matter if you're the day-to-day starter or if you're a starter in the pinch. When you start, you start. That's how I see it. You're off the sidelines right now. You are in the game, but I appreciate you joining me for this. And like I said, we have a few things that we want to discuss. Is more of a elongated bites because there are some things that I think will take a little bit more time to discuss. And the first thing is dealing with the 2024-25 Duke men's basketball roster. And there was a tweet, and I believe it's Andrew Weatherman who put this tweet out, and with nice infographics. Is great. If you want to go find it, I'll post it in the show notes and everything. But the thing about Duke this year is we've talked about how Duke has gotten meaner. They've gotten faster, more physical, and they've gotten older. And all that leads to Duke being what he calls unprecedentedly experienced. This roster has set program records entering this season for cumulative college total minutes played, games started, total rebounds, and three-pointers made across the three-point era. So what that means is entering, when you gather all the stats that this team has and compare it to teams before they start the season, this team is up there with being one of the most experienced that we've had in several different areas. But Scott, I know you've taken a look at this as well. What does this mean for this team, right? Is this another thing that we can add to the expectations that we have in this team? Or is this just, hey, these are some good stats, but it doesn't mean anything until we're on the court?
So I have a glass half full, glass half empty perspective on this. Glass half full, first off, this guy's now one of my favorite people in the world as a former mathematician. The data visualization, the fact he's using z-scores, this is some great hardcore data analysis that anyone who is in, the STEM disciplines at Duke, will appreciate. So you got to love that he went deep and did it right. And the trends that he identifies are it. The fact is that the teams that have similar, returning minutes played, similar levels of returning points are amongst Duke's most successful teams. Obviously, a lot of those teams go back into a little bit of a bygone era. One of them is, of course, the 1992 championship team, which was returning a whole bunch of another championship team. So, it's hard to sort of compare eras there, but the trend is there. And if you look at it that way, it's a glass half full, and it's a really good sign for Duke this year. Here's the glass half empty, though. This data is skewed. And this data is skewed by one guy who is Jason Evans' favorite player in the world, and his name is Sion James.
Mm-hmm.
Sion James, because he's played 4 years, and because he played 4 years at a lower level at Tulane, he's played a disproportionate number of minutes that are these returning experience minutes. He averaged more than 35 minutes a game the last 3 years at Tulane. He started all but 2 games over that span. And obviously, there's just a high volume of 3-point shots from that he made, even if he wasn't known as a 3-point shooter. And if you want to get deeper into the 3-point shot element of it, Mason Gillis is going to skew that 3-point shot returning because, again, he has 4 years of experience. So all of that goes to say, are these trends that Andrew identified, are they valid in this new era of college basketball where you can get older via transfer, where you can get older and have statistics on your team that weren't generated in that same level of competition? And that's where the glass half empty is here, because we don't know. We don't have the analysis. We don't have the data on that, right? The transfer portal era is 3-4 years old, and it's changing every gosh darn day. So it's hard to, really take a look at this, especially given how much of an outlier some of these things are, and take something overly significant away from this beyond the fact that Sion James has played a lot of basketball. Mason Gillis has played a lot of basketball. That is good. That is going to make this Duke team better. Is it going to mean that we're necessarily a championship team because of just that? I don't know. I think there are a couple of other things that contribute to that, namely Cooper Flagg. But it's a interesting data point nonetheless. I just think it's interesting and not much more.
So a couple of things that I want to piggyback on with regards to your glass half full, glass half empty. Let's start with the glass, not necessarily half empty, but beware what
Half
you're
realistic.
drinking. Yeah, half. Well, it's not even that. It's more about, hey, the glass may look full, but buyer beware. It may not be the shot that you think it is, right? And you mentioned 1992 and how that team looks stacked, right? And the numbers show that, at least from the data that is presented here. And of course, that's coming off of a national championship winning team. I look at 2002, which again is one of the teams that has the poster on my wall as one of the teams that should have won in my mind but didn't. And if you look at that, that is statistically the best team that is coming out of the 3-point era. They are first, second, third, and fourth in every single category. But of course, they didn't win. So again, you kind of lend yourself to the idea. And 2009 is another one, right, where they had some really good, stats, really
How about
good recurring
2011?
things. 2011, the same way, right? And you have some of these, and it's, I think it does paint a good picture of 2021, that COVID year where we missed everything. That's the worst team statistically in this bunch here. But also you look at 2000 or 2022, right? Probably the second worst team, and they made the Final Four. So there's things that, yes, this doesn't necessarily translate to success, but I do think the one thing that I will say glass half full that I think is great. You mentioned the type of experience that the guys coming in and have. First of all, we have half the team that doesn't have any experience, right? You have two guys that are returning, or I should say 3 guys that are returning that really don't factor into this, right? Stanley Borden, Spencer Hubbard, and Neil Begovic don't really factor into this. They didn't have a ton of minutes. They're not expected to get a ton of minutes, if any, this year. But I do think that the type of experience that we went out and got is what people are excited about, because in my mind, what I think the staff did well is they got it from different areas. We got an ACC guy who knows the ACC, all ACC defender. We have Mason Gillis, who knows the Big Ten, knows big time basketball, has been to a national championship game, knows what it takes to get there. And then you have Sion James, who knows how to play well at a mid-major level, because hey, those are some of the teams we're going to have to face, as we'll talk about in a minute. You're not just going to win by beating the Big Tens and the ACCs and the SECs of the world. You have to win against some of these mid-major teams whose only job in life is to try and beat you. That is their Super Bowl. That is their national championship game every single year, every time they play a big team. And of course, they want to be on SportsCenter for life by saying we're the team that beat Duke and Cameron. So you have a guy who can understand that mindset, understand what it takes to play against some of those teams, and kind of, when you combine all that with the quote experience that we have in our freshman class, guys who have played in big time games in high school, but also you have our returning duo, our backcourt. You have some measures where you can get better in a lot of areas, but you also have experience in a lot of areas. And I think this experience is what's unprecedented. The fact that it's coming from a lot of different areas, and it kind of makes it a big smorgasbord or ratatouille of hopeful success for this season.
I think what is to be determined, I think this is the type of analysis that a guy like Andrew Weatherman is going to be doing 5 years from now is whether raw experience is important or whether returning experience is important. And
Mhm.
we've seen evidence of teams in the last few years that go about things both ways. Alabama made it to the Final Four last year, and they were an old team, but they were an old team that was almost exclusively through the transfer portal. On the other end of the spectrum, Purdue made the national championship game on a team that was very much homegrown. And then you had UConn winning it all. There was a little bit of a mix. They had their open returning guys, but obviously Cam Spencer was the straw that stirred the drink, and he was a 1 year transfer. And they had a couple of other transfers in there as well. That's what's
And then
to
you have
be
NC
determined.
State. You have NC
And then,
State, who
and
the whole team
exactly.
was a transfer, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're even more extreme version of Alabama. So I think there really is it is to be determined what the defining factor is here, whether it's confounding variables, right? If again, I'm going off in my math, terminology here. This you're going to regret inviting me on as the cleanup hitter now. But right, they're confounding, right? Age and experience and time spent at the same school are often correlated. So the question is, which one of those two is the most important to returning to success? The guys that have Duke rated 8, 9, 10 in their way too early rankings are those who probably think what you need is returning experience and sort of cohesiveness and continuity. The guys who have Duke ranked 3, 4, 5 in their way too early rankings are the kind who probably think, hey, you need a superstar talent like Cooper Flagg plus some older dudes. And it doesn't matter if those older dudes are 4 years in Durham or 4 years elsewhere. And again, Duke is going to be a very interesting test case for that. I don't think there has been a team constructed the way Duke is constructed in the post-COVID, transfer proliferation of the transfer portal era.
It's kind of like looking for a job, right? Like, companies are out there saying, do you want to promote from within and have that kind of continuity? Or is any experience good experience that they can use and tool the way they need to make that particular branch work or that particular division work? It's a great thing to think about. And it's a great, at least to have these numbers and kind of these stats to kind of look back at what we're dealing with here. Obviously, every team is a little bit different, but is going to be very interesting to see how these match up, right? If we're number one in total rebounds, does that mean we're going to be a huge rebounding team? Maybe, maybe not, right? On the other side, last year I thought we had a ton of threes, or I'm sorry, a ton of assists, right? We were really good at spreading the ball around, and when we didn't spread the ball around, that's when we were terrible. It doesn't reflect in these numbers that they were this team that was going to be passing the ball on every possession and doing a lot of ball movement. So it's going to be interesting to see how these numbers track compared to what we actually do as a team on the floor. Only time will tell with that. I know we're entering August and we're feeling like the season's right around the corner, and it is, but we still have a lot of time before we get to the actual games where we can kind of see how this fleshes out. Last word to you.
So I'm going to take things off a little bit. We're talking about a tweet that got our interest here. There's
Mhm.
another tweet that came out from a similarly respected guy, Jeff Goodman, that came just recently. Jeff Goodman is now on the Con Knipple train, just like the rest of us. He put out a tweet about 3 hours ago saying that sources told him, which those sources probably were this podcast and the Brotherhood podcast, let's be honest, that Con Knipple has been the standout of practice and the surprise of the summer. I saw this and I died a little bit inside because Jeff Goodman was also the leader of the TJ Power is going to be Duke's fifth starter train last year, and we all know how that ended up. So who knows? I really hope that Jeff Goodman isn't a isn't just gonna will this in or anti jinx this out of existence. But the Con Knipple train has left the station. The buzz is building and it's now getting out beyond Durham and into the national sphere.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because literally last night I had a call with a friend who attended a practice a few days ago, and he had the same type of assessment when it comes to Concanipple. And yeah, that buzz seems to be growing, and as you mentioned, now coming from people who are saying that publicly And it's not like people who are like, yeah, I went to this hidden practice and here's what I saw. These are public people publicly saying that this is so. And yeah, it's going to be one of those things where maybe that means he's not, you can't keep him off the floor, but what does that do to the rotation? This is why they don't pay me anything to be the Duke basketball coach. They pay Jon Scheyer that money because he gets to make those decisions, and I'm sure that is something they're going to figure out as practice goes along. Speaking of this team, let's move on to our next topic, and it is the schedule. We have a new, at least a new announcement from Wofford that Wofford said, "Hey, they're coming to Cameron. They're coming to Cameron on November 16th, a Saturday game. I don't think they have times yet, but Duke will be hosting Wofford on November 16th. And I think, Scott, this is an interesting one because one, Wofford is that mid-major, low-major team that everyone's heard of, right? Like they're in the national, they're in the the NCAA tournament most years, right? They're not in every year, but they're a team when you see Wofford, you're like, oh, Wofford's a decent program. They're not gonna be this 16th seed that we can blast by 50. They're a team that's gonna fight. They're a team that's gonna play well. They were 193rd in KenPom last year, but Bart Torvik in his preseason rankings has them 150th. So he thinks they're gonna be a little bit better this year than they were last year. But I think it also adds to what is mounting to be one kind of a daunting schedule, but also an interesting schedule because outside of Maine, it doesn't feel like Duke is playing any slouches this year. And I think one, people will be excited about that, but also two, it means that this team who was going to get all the expectations in the world, great, deserved or not, they're going to get those expectations of being an elite team, and they're going to have to prove it from day one.
So you can look at this and just say, hey, it's a schedule filler. It's a team that Duke should beat by 20, 30 points. Not that big of a deal. I think there's a trend here, right? There's a trend in who Duke is scheduling for those so-called mid-major matchups. If you look at Wofford finished last year ranked 185th in the net. Duke played 5 non-conference games last year against teams ranked lower than that in the net. All these were Q4 games. These were the LaSalle, Queens, Bucknell, Southern Indiana, Dartmouth games. So there's those 5 games on the schedule last year. Those were the cupcakiest of cupcake games. Duke has scheduled games in the traditional cupcake slots against teams that are going to require more. Wofford is a program that's beat UNC twice in the last 10 years or so. Wofford is a team that has had some success in the NCAA tournament, like you've said. There is a difference between playing a team that is ranked in the 150 to 200th in KenPom versus playing a team that's ranked in the 300th in KenPom. It may not show up in those Q quadrant records that we talk so much about, but that impacts your strength of schedule. That impacts your efficiency metrics based upon those efficiency metrics being weighted by who they came against. So the reality is Duke doesn't traditionally like to run up the score. Duke isn't going to beat a team by 40, 50 points unless it happens organically. A 30-point win against Wofford is going to look a lot better than a 30-point win against Bucknell or Dartmouth come season's
or
end.
Queens, right? Like where, when Queens was announced, even people in North Carolina, Queens is in Charlotte. People are like, Queens, what? What is a Queens? Are we talking about Queens, New York? Are we talking about Queens, Cincinnati? Like people had to figure out on a map where it is. People don't care where Wofford is, but they know who Wofford is. I know I cut you off, but the thing about Wofford is I always think back to when TNT first took control of the NCAA tournament, like broadcasting alongside CBS, and they had Kenny Smith and Chuck and Ernie on there, and they're like, hey, how do you guys feel? They're going down the line of how they feel about hosting a tournament, and Charles Barkley basically said, here are my expectations. Here's your expectations for me, right? Here's what you should have for me. I don't know what a Wofford is, but I bet you I know basketball, right? But he found out very quickly that Wofford is college basketball. He found out very quickly that Wofford wasn't just a team that he could make fun of. They were a team that comes and they fight. And I think one thing that Jon Scheyer, it kind of lends back to the roster question. Jon wants competitors. He wants teams to come in expecting to beat us. And he wants our team to expect to have to put up with everyone's best shot. Wofford is going to give us our best shot.
The thing that's, I think, most encouraging about this, regardless of how this plays out on Selection Sunday and in the bracketologist and all that annoying stuff that we shouldn't have to be thinking about in August. I think what this shows is the confidence that Jon Scheyer has in this team. If
Mhm.
Jon Scheyer was feeling a little bit antsy, he would be scheduling a Bucknell or a Southern Indiana or a Dartmouth. He wouldn't be scheduling a team that, again, has a history of beating UNC twice at UNC since 2007, right? You wouldn't be scheduling those, bite your nail off type of opponents if you didn't think you had a team that was going to handle that the way a team that's going to compete for a national championship should. I may sound like an idiot, 3 months from now when that game happens, if Wofford gives us a tighter contest than we think. But I think, again, this shows there's a trend here. There's a trend of the type of teams that Jon has scheduled, both at the high level and at the level, that they're the type of teams that show he's confident in his guys. He's confident that his team is going to be amongst the best. And at the quiet period of the summer where we're all grasping at straws trying to figure out what to talk about when we're talking about Duke basketball. We don't have much data. That's what little data we have. And I think the only way to interpret that is encouraging.
The going rate of how Duke has scheduled their non-conference schedule, even under Coach K, was they wanted to get games that of teams that they could see down the line in the NCAA tournament, styles of play that they might see in the NCAA tournament, first round all the way to a title game, right? So we have the teams that we're going to face as like the 15, 16 seeds, all the way to who we could, those big time games at like the Champions Classic. And when I look at this, Jon Scheyer has the same idea, but what's different is he's not going after the 300s and the 200s that you could see in the first round. He's going after what could be the best possible team that you could face if you're really good in the first round, right? Like if you're a 6 seed, you're facing an 11. If you're a 7 seed, you're facing a 10. So when you think about it, you mentioned that last year, according to KenPom, there were five teams we played that were under the 183 that Wofford was in KenPom. This year, there are only 3 teams that we have scheduled in the non-conference as of right now that are under 100. Or I'm sorry, 100 or worse, right? You got Maine at according to Bart Torvik, Maine is at 217, Wofford's at 150, and Seattle, who we face in that NIL, not NIL type, or I'm sorry, that multi-team event, not multi-team event in Vegas, they're 138. Everyone else is we have 4 in the top 10. I'm sorry, 3 in the top 10, 4 in the top 20, and then we have Kentucky in 23, and we have George Mason even at 85. And there's 2 more to go, and we shouldn't expect that anyone is going to be less than Maine. I'm sure there could be, right? There's plenty of ways to kind of throw in, especially coming off of that Christmas break that we usually take for reading period and then for Christmas holiday right before the ACC schedule starts up. Who knows who they are able to get then? But it's not like we're going to have a team like like a Queens anymore. It feels like this year he wants to go away from that and go towards teams that, yes, they may be a little weaker, but he wants teams that can challenge this team so that they are locked in the whole time. And it kind of goes to this whole mentality of it feels like he wants to be way more competitive and he wants this team to always have to feel like they have to earn the spot that they're at. So I think that's really cool. And again, when you're selling this and packaging it to the season ticket holders, like I said, they know who a Wofford is. They know Wofford is not a slouch team. They know that could be a decent game, and that helps them retain people who want to keep their tickets. If you don't want to keep your tickets, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. But I digress. I think the idea here is that you get these teams that people know so that when the committee meets in March, they go, wow, Duke beat all these teams right here. They list them. They don't have to look up on a map where that team is. They don't have to look up what conference they're in. They know that team is a decent team that they may already be considering in another facet for the NCAA tournament.
It'll be very interesting to see who those final 2 teams are. It feels like it's later than usual for those last pieces of the puzzle to be announced. It has me wondering whether something else is cooking up, something interesting, something surprising. Because again, it's easy to call up, one of the UNC Wilmingtons or whatnot and just throw them into the schedule, if we're waiting, if it's into August and Duke's schedule isn't finalized, who knows? Maybe there's something interesting coming on. I've said this for a while. I would love to see Duke go on the road to one of these mid-major style schools. I would
Mhm.
love to see Duke play a road game against a, you know, George Mason style opponent who we should win, but is going to challenge us, is going to give us that road mentality, is going to give us a bit more experience on playing those type of games in the ACC, the type of games that have tripped Duke up. This year, we're obviously playing Arizona. That's a big time game on the road.
Mhm.
That'll give us some of that experience right off the bat. But I've always thought that not having more of that road experience early is just sort of a weird thing that Duke doesn't do that some other big time programs have done. I have no inside info. You and Jason are the guys with the inside info. I just piggyback off of you. I have no inside info about this, but I would love to see something like that on Duke's schedule, if not now, in the future.
I think I agree with you to an extent. I don't know that we need to go to Wofford to play, right? But yes, I do agree on the point that, having a non-conference game or two on the road really helps, because what's the one thing that we try to prepare for, but we really can't, is being in other people's arenas or being in a neutral site arena and having everybody cheer against us in the NCAA tournament. That happens all the time, right? We very rarely have a pro Duke crowd during the NCAA tournament, especially when we are good. Like, there are teams that every other fan base in the gym wants us to lose that particular game, including the teams that may have to see us down the line. They want us out of the picture. So uh, getting that road experience really helps. I think going to Arizona, mind you, there's a date change in that. It was supposed to be on November 21st. It's now November 22nd, which is a Friday. So I think they pushed it so that they could just stay on the West Coast, to go and make it where it was less of a trip between that and the Kansas game that's in Vegas. But I do think that Duke has to find ways to challenge themselves with teams that are strong, but also, again, the styles of play are different. The teams that we're seeing are different, and I like the approach that this year was bringing so far. And you're right, this seems very late for not having at least a non-conference schedule finalized. I am hearing that there might be a surprise when it comes to the schedule, not necessarily in the regular season. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but if it does, I think a nice little game that would be um, really, really cool for fans. But also, I think they have that practice that they usually do, that air quote secret scrimmage that they like to do,
Not
and
so
that
secret
always
anymore.
not
I
so
in
secret,
that
but at least
last
you can't go to those games or
well,
those practices, right? So
and that rules lesson, it's very very unclear. But last year, some of those games that used to be the secret scrimmages were because I think they got around it by having it be for charity and they were
charity exhibitions,
televised,
exactly
right?
right.
So
Yeah.
Michigan State played. I forget. Michigan State played someone, and it was on BT. It was on Big Ten Network. It was
Hmm.
sold out stadium. I think a couple other teams did as well. You very interestingly just said not a regular season game. So I wonder if maybe that might be reading between the lines here, that
You're
maybe
picking up
Duke
what
is
I'm
going to
putting
hop
down.
on. Maybe Duke's going to hop on that train. Maybe I've just burned your source accidentally and given you
No,
yet another reason not to invite me on. But that would be a very interesting development for this Duke team if that comes to pass.
well, again, and as we close out, I think if they were able to do a charity exhibition, right, like against a team, and I know there's rules on how they do it, who they can play, yada yada yada. But if they're able to do that, that could then allow them to maybe schedule a team that's maybe, in the main section, right, of strength of schedule, right? Because that means that they will still have something that they can package to season ticket holders, also a game that everyone goes, oh, at least they're challenging themselves even in that preseason. That the 2019 and some of these other years, some people would say that the best game that they played, or the most challenging game they played, was Countdown to Craziness, when they lined up against each other. The hope is that that's not the case this year, despite how good that we could possibly be. We want to be able to continue to test ourselves, and I think, at least, from what we've seen so far, Duke is doing that. They're really going out of their way to make sure that this team is challenged, so that when they hit the tournament, they will be battle tested and hopefully ready to challenge for a national championship. Let's pause it right here. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, we will talk some football and we will talk some Duke adjacent items. But first, take this quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by our good friends at NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. I'm sure by now you've all gotten back into your Sunday routines, but they could be even better. With NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get the most live NFL games all in one place, every game, every Sunday. And you can even watch up to 4 different games at once with Multiview, one of my favorite inventions of this decade. It's exactly what you need to catch all the action. Make your Sundays more magical. And also, YouTube TV is great. I got it this year. It's awesome. Sign up now at youtube.com/BS. Device and content restrictions apply. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games.
We are back, and quickly we're going to shift to the gridiron for a little bit. Duke and the ACC obviously are about to start their season. We are in August. Football season has essentially begun when the Hall of Fame game happened in Canton, Ohio. Football was officially back on the menu for a lot of folks. And the ACC the other day released their preseason poll of the ACC. Which teams do they think are going to be the best of the best? And of course, we now have 18 or 17 teams. It's not 18 because Notre Dame still refuses to join us in football, but they have in everything else. So minus them, all 17 other teams of the ACC, with the addition of Cal and Stanford, were ranked by a bunch of voters. And Duke is picked to finish 11th in the conference. Of course, again, Duke last year did very well, but we are undergoing obviously a nice transition. Mike Elko left, and is Manny Diaz, and coaching staff. We have some new players in, including Malik Murphy, who is expected to be the starter at quarterback. Florida State is the team picked to win the ACC by the voters. Clemson, number 2. Miami is number 3. I do want to point out that Boston College, who is ranked 14th in this poll, and Cal, who is ranked 10th, just above Duke, both of those teams received first place votes somehow. Cal actually received 2. Cal has not played a down in the ACC, and yet 2 people think that they will win the ACC this year. Must be some people from San Francisco who do not have their geography straight. Scott, I come to you. What do you think about Duke being number 11 in this poll? Do you think that's right around where we think, or is it a wait and see game to kind of determine what will happen in the beginning days of the Manny Diaz era?
I will say that the thing that jumped out at me first when looking at these rankings is how spread out those first place votes are.
Yes.
Like, it goes beyond what you just said. You know, Georgia Tech has 1 vote, Virginia Tech has 5. You know, it's spread out. It's not just Florida State and Clemson, which is very interesting. I think it sort of goes to the historic craziness of the ACC that might be phasing out as Florida State and Clemson sort of try to, you know, reclaim their dominance in the conference. We'll see whether that comes to pass. Obviously, there are certain media members who are still expecting some ACC wackiness. As far as where Duke's ranked, I think that's what you should be expecting when you have a new coach, right? There's always a down value on your team when you bring in a new coaching staff. We're seeing that to, you know, some extent over the last couple of years with Jon Scheyer, and how, you know, and you talked about this with Brendan Marks about how teams that might, you know, be top 5 teams if Coach K was the coach are now thought of as top 10, top 15 teams with Jon Scheyer because he hasn't proven himself, right? You know, I think Duke might have been ranked a little bit higher if there was some continuity, if Mike Elko was coming back. That said, as college football has evolved, the teams that have quarterback play are always a cut above teams that have question marks at quarterback. And there's a lot of reason for Duke to be really, really excited about Malik Murphy as its presumptive starting quarterback. You know, we forget that this was a guy who was a consensus top 50 recruit. He was a high 4-star guy going to Texas that, you know, would have been the heir apparent, would probably still be at Texas if Arch Manning didn't come and sort of usurp him as Quinn Ewers, you know, heir apparent. So Duke really struck gold getting a guy with his pedigree. And again, you know, there's a lot of question marks about like, oh, how useful are, transfer rankings, how useful are prospect rankings, things like that. And I misspoke, by the way. He was a top 50 transfer ranked. He was more of a top
Mhm.
200 recruit, but still top 10 in terms of quarterbacks in his class. But I digress. Duke has reason to be hopeful at the quarterback position. And that is a luxury to have, especially when you have a first year head coach. If Malik Murphy can play like a top 10 quarterback in his class, which he did, which he was ranked, Duke has a high ceiling. Duke has a higher ceiling than, than perhaps they did last year post Riley Leonard injury when quarterback play was always a question mark. And Duke still competed. Duke still had the pieces to win its bowl game and to play really well, even without Riley Leonard at the helm. So I think probably that's low, but Duke is always going to be ranked low in the football rankings. That's just a reality. The world hasn't come around to the fact that Duke has been a football program for the last 10 years. Long, long ago were the times when Duke literally won a lawsuit by claiming that they were the worst school in the Power Five. So Louisville had no claims because they could literally schedule any opponent
Anyone
that would
else.
be
Yeah.
better. That was where the football program was when I entered campus before David Cutcliffe, right? So the world hasn't come around to the fact that Duke has been a solid Power Four, Power Five football program over the last 10 years. That's fine. We don't care. We don't need their accolades. But I think that if Malik Murphy is who the rankings say he is, then there is a higher ceiling for this Duke team than 11th in the ACC, like this poll says.
And when you think about it, right, one, it's not like we're expecting Duke to challenge for the ACC. It'd be great, but like that's not a realistic expectation when you look at Florida State, when you look at Clemson, and even when you look at my other alma mater of Miami. Those are the three class teams probably of the ACC at this point entering the preseason, and that's fine. You're able to do that. One note from this: when you look at the rankings here and where Duke is in relation to the rest of the teams, Duke plays North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Florida State, SMU, Miami, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. That last team, Wake Forest, the only team on our schedule that is ranked lower than us in this preseason poll. So the thing about it is the ACC is probably thinking they have to play all these teams. It's a murderer's row for the entire season almost, and they're not going to get all these wins. What is helpful for Duke is that, hey, if you get on a run early in the season during a non-conference schedule, maybe pick off UNC, which is homecoming on September 28th, I want to say 27th, 28th weekend. Then you have an idea that you can maybe pick off another team, right? And pick off a team here and there. You've vaulted to the top half, top half of the ACC. And remember, there are no more divisions. There's no Coastal, there's no Atlantic. It's just one table. So everyone can move up, and you sometimes will get help from other teams, especially teams that you aren't playing. So yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting season for the ACC, mainly because yes, we're adding two new teams, but also and Stanford is ranked to be the worst team, one of the worst teams in the Power Five, and we just are unlucky that we're playing them this year. But I do think Duke has a chance to impress some people on the way up. If you're thinking they're all towards the bottom, that's fine, because as they start to work up, if they can pick off one of these teams like an SMU or an NC State or even a Virginia Tech, then people look at them a little bit differently, and it gives them some buzz as they enter towards the back half of the season, where maybe they're not going for an ACC championship game appearance, but they're going for one of those better bowl games than the Birmingham Bowl we were in last year.
You mentioned Stanford and how one of these newcomers is picked last in the ACC. The other two newcomers, Cal and SMU, have some respect. SMU's ranked 7th in this poll. Cal is ranked 10th, again, with 2 votes to win the conference for whatever reason. But it's an interesting dichotomy compared to the basketball side of things, where, when you went to Vegas and we're looking at the odds, the 3 newcomers were basically at the bottom of the barrel in the ACC. So, in this new world of, hey, how stable is the ACC moving forward? If SMU can be a top 25 team, now that they have that recognition, now that they have the ACC, maybe the ACC as a football conference isn't so dead and buried as people thought. There's tons of money, and tons of boosters wanting to turn SMU back into a football powerhouse that they were in that bygone era. It was a weird pickup. I think that's a good way to sort of, collectively judge how people viewed that when they were at the ACC. But there's a reason. They weren't just a throw-in. They're a team that is a potential sleeping giant as it comes to football. If SMU can come in and just be a good, solid ACC team in year one, I think that will add some stability to this conference moving forward, adding another team that gives us that footprint in Texas and potentially has a higher ceiling than some of the other schools in the ACC that don't have any sort of football history.
I mean, look, my dad and brother live down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and SMU was like 12th in the grand scheme of things that are important in Dallas-Fort Worth. But in the ACC, when it comes to college football, you're right. They do have some boosters who got some cash. And being in the ACC, it seems like now they're thinking, okay, now it's time to spend it. And if they are a team, again, we face them in October. So if we can pick them off, that could be viewed as a good win as we move forward. And again, a win that leapfrogs us up the table so that when it comes time for bowl placement, we're not getting the short end of the stick like I think we did last year because Mike Elko left, right? We will have a team that's decent, a team that people know will be a tough out, and maybe that puts us in a bowl game against a tough opponent where it would be an interesting game, one for fans to travel to, but also for these guys to get up for. So that's what I'm hoping for this year. Obviously, bowl eligibility is an easy thing to say that's a goal, but in this first year under Manny Diaz, get back to a bowl game, make it be a really good one, and let's see where the chips may fall. But we will obviously have more coverage of Duke football as we move along, moving up to that first game against Elon, which is Labor Day weekend. Let's go back to basketball, but again, we're going to do some Duke adjacent stuff real quick. We're going to go right down the street from me to Howard University. And friend of the podcast, Kenny Blakeney, who is the head coach at Howard, has been there for a few years, has done really well in getting Howard to the NCAA tournament the last couple of years. He apparently is trying to sell 1/3 of the Howard program for $100 million. Now, you're thinking, how can he do that? He doesn't know either. And in this article from the Washington Post, he basically said, I haven't talked to my higher-ups about this yet, but the idea is he wants to figure out a way for Howard to not get lost in the sauce when it comes to all this money that's being flown or being passed around in college sports. He has spent the summer kind of pitching the program to private equity groups and potential investors he's hoping to get money to upgrade the team's arena and the practice facility, and then somehow bring revenue in by getting naming rights for both of those entities. Now, I think the thing about it is this is an out of the box way of thinking, right? Or an approach to trying to figure out how to keep up with the arms race. Is it a clever one? Yeah, it kind of is. I'm sure some people have been like, yeah, how do you get more money? I don't know that anyone's come up with the idea, Scott, of trying to sell half the program and get like a valuation, right? But I do think if he's able to get some influx of cash, that will help Howard, because they are to say they're on a shoestring budget is not accurate, because shoestrings cost a lot more than the budget that they have. And what they have done with the lack of funds and the lack of resources is incredible in a way, and they've done very well with it. But he understands that will not sustain, and for Howard to be able to compete, he even talks about the NCAA tournament becoming this thing at some point where the Howards of the world are shut out of it, and he wants to be in a position where monetarily, at least, Howard will always be at that table. And I think that's yes, it's a clever way of doing it. I don't know if it's a legal way of doing it. That's what lawyers are for, not name me. But I do think that the idea of him trying to upgrade with an out of box approach, that's that right brain thinking right there. But I hope he's able to get some of that cash that they definitely need.
When I saw this story, my first thought was watching Kenny Blakeney go on Shark Tank and pitches his $100 million valuation for a third of the company, and Mr. Wonderful going, "How did you get that valuation?"
Just going like, I will give you a royalty. I will buy your program for a royalty that will come off. Like
something tells me he would not get very far in that mock Shark Tank episode. But I think the the reasons that he's trying this are really important, right? The realities of how do smaller Division I schools, even far below even the mid majors that we think about, how do they survive in the transfer portal NIL era? How do they survive when with the consolidation of conferences where it's one or two big football conferences that are bringing in orders of magnitude higher dollar values than anyone else? That is one of the biggest questions facing college sports moving forward. And until we get past this silly side door to paying the players via NIL, and there's actually some sort of collective bargaining, and there's actually some sort of salary cap or all these sorts of things, it really is a question of how do these teams compete, and are we going to lose out on that magical part of college sports, the crazy upsets, the Cinderella stories, the things that for us differentiate watching college basketball from watching a professional sport. And it's a shame and it's sad that that is where things are heading, that might not be sustainable moving forward, that these are going to be much, much fewer and far between stories of these smaller schools, the Davids beating the Goliaths. You know, I I can't imagine this is going to work out for Kenny Blakeney, but you got to give him credit. He's taken a swing. He's not just sitting around waiting for, the sky to fall. He's saying there's a problem. I'm going to try to solve it. Uh, I can't imagine this is going to work. But someone has to do something. There has to be a concerted effort, not just by individual programs, but by the NCAA or whatever succeeds the NCAA that in organizing college sports to make sure these mid majors are viable, if that is indeed where the sport wants to go. And unfortunately, it's a open question whether that is even what the Big Tens and the SECs of the world want. And we're gonna, that we'll wait and see 10 years from now whether Gonzaga is viable or whether Gonzaga has to go to the Big 12 to compete. How the Big East competes in basketball when they don't have football contracts, propping up their athletic departments. These are big questions that get lost underneath oh, look at this big NIL dollar that such and such player made. Look at all the Lamborghinis that are parked in front of the Texas practice facility. These are the under the radar guts questions of this new era of college basketball that someone's got to solve. It ain't going to be us on this podcast, but someone who makes a lot more money and has a lot more vested interest in these things has to do something about this, or we're just going to be going, the ball is just going to keep rolling downhill.
He mentioned that one of the things that he was looking for, and the reason why he's kind of thinking outside the box here, is because of the TV deals and the mega contracts that, the Power Five conferences have been signing with regards to football, even college basketball. You mentioned the Big East. I wouldn't be surprised if for every dollar Howard brings in revenue and TV money and apparel and all that, for every $1 they bring in, Texas and Ohio State and Alabama are bringing in 100. It might even be more than that. And I think he understands that, one, they need to get a better TV deal, but how do you do that when you can't show that you're making improvements to the quality of your program and also the competition, right? And I think you've seen him play some bigger teams to get Howard's name back out there as more than just an HBCU, but a team that can compete on the basketball court. You've seen more HBCUs play on TV, right? And whether it's ESPN Plus or ESPNU or something like that, they're getting more of those games on TV. But the idea is to get more money from those games instead of just hey, can you please just give us the exposure? This is the internship problem, right? Like, do you get a paid internship, or we're going to pay you an exposure? Howard's done with the paid exposure bit. They want to get actual money that they can use to reinvest into the program, and I think that is always going to be something that Howard and other HBCUs have to deal with in this country until, as you mentioned, there is some sort of, minds that meet and adults get into a room and say, hey, let's make this a level playing field for everyone. But, at this point, some of these schools may not want that, right? Texas wants to be able to pay what they can, right? A&M probably wants to pay a coach $100 million if they want to. And that is never going to be what a team like Howard is going to be. But to preserve the upset, to preserve the Cinderella, to preserve the magical moment that is March in these tournament games where anything can happen, where David can beat Goliath. You got to give them some opportunity to sustain themselves. And hopefully, as they say, he's aiming for the moon, but hopefully, if he fails, he's landing amongst the stars. And if he's landing amongst the stars, at least he's getting more money for the program. Maybe, again, naming rights are an easy thing. Getting a better TV deal, not necessarily easy thing, but one that could help, almost immediately. And so I hope he gets it. But it is a tall task to try and sell a third of the program for $100 million. I don't know how that works out, but again, we'll
How
let
did you
Howard
come to
deal
that
with
valuation?
Right. That if someone wants to do a Shark Tank, NCAA Shark Tank would actually be pretty funny for like NIL valuation stuff like that. Because I want to be on that committee. I'm like, you're stupid. No, we're not giving you $3 million. Yeah, come on over here. We'll give you $3 million, and I can spend other people's money.
Some YouTuber needs to make that, college basketball transfer portal Shark Tank needs to be some YouTuber
Transfer
who's
portal
funnier
Shark
than
Tank.
us needs to
Patent
turn
pending,
that into
ladies
a
and
thing.
gentlemen. Patent pending. Trademark's already in the thing, so don't even try it. Scott's got it. So let's move on to our final topic of this episode, and it's two women's basketball players who are making a name for themselves in men's basketball in the pros. First off, Lindsey Harding. Of course, her name and number are in the rafters in Cameron. She will join the Los Angeles Lakers to serve as an assistant coach under another guy whose name and number are in the rafters. Of course, JJ Redick is the head coach of the Lakers now, and he has brought on Lindsey Harding, who was the G League Coach of the Year for the Stockton Kings last year and has really done well. I think she even interviewed for a couple of head coaching positions in the NBA, but now she will serve at least this season under JJ Redick with the Lakers. I think that's a really cool deal. Also, Misty Bass Boyd, I should say. She is recently married. Misty Bass Boyd will be working under Trajan Langdon with the Detroit Pistons. She will be the executive director for player engagement and basketball operations. Again, Trajan Langdon just moved to the Pistons to take over all basketball decisions for the team, which is my team and Scott, yours, sorely needed. So it's great that we have some brotherhood and sisterhood magic working for the Pistons. Misty Bass played for I think she played with Lindsey Harding at Duke. Really, really great player. Has won a WNBA title in 2014, but also has been moving into the executive world with basketball. But it's great to see both of them, Lindsey Harding and Misty Bass, working in the pros in the NBA and really making a name for themselves in what they're doing.
Yeah, it's nice to have some more reasons to root for the Detroit Pistons, given the shabby state that our beloved franchise is in. It's always a little bit easier when there's aren't any Blue Devils on the court anymore for the Pistons, but there are at least some Blue Devils in the in those owners' boxes that we can be rooting for, that are having a hand in things. Look, I think this is it's such a cool story, seeing the Duke connection maintained, years and years down the line, right? The fact that these are Duke to Duke hires, right? These are, Trajan Langdon and JJ Redick hiring fellow Dukies and giving them the opportunity. I think that's a testament to the brotherhood / sisterhood that, that goes beyond just being in the Duke basketball program, but just speaks to being a Duke Blue Devil, period. I think that it's a really cool story. The fact that it's happening, twice in one off season it's just a testament to how much Duke runs the NBA, how much the brotherhood just permeates all elements of the basketball world nowadays. And now that is extending to the sisterhood, starting to make more and more inroads into the NBA. It's just there's no way to look at the story and not just smile as a Duke alum.
Yeah, it's super great. I don't like the Lakers, but I really hope that JJ and Lindsey do well when they're not facing Pistons. Also, I will point out Wendell Moore Jr. is on the roster for the Pistons. We traded for him.
There we go. I forgot
we
still have one.
We still have one left that at least we'll be able to see the court. And then again, like you mentioned, a couple in the boardroom making some decisions that will hopefully bring our franchise back, bring back the bad boys in the going to work era. Combine those, put it in a little pot, maybe give us the championship. That doesn't have to be next year, but the year after.
Maybe get Cooper Flag next year. That could change a lot of things for the Detroit Pistons or
It would change for a lot of teams. And hope I'm done with the draft. I don't, or at least the lottery. Lottery is unkind to us, but I will end it there. But I think when it comes to those two, I think it's great that they are both getting some high profile positions with NBA franchises, and hopefully we'll do well. Both will be following each of them and the rest of the brotherhood and the sisterhood throughout the season. Again, as I mentioned, the U.S. women's basketball team, Kara Lawson's on the bench, Chelsea Gray is on the roster. They are pummeling Nigeria right now, who also have Elizabeth Balogun, who played at Duke. So the sisterhood's out there, the brotherhood's out there. They're all doing a lot of work. That will end it for this episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Jason, hope you're enjoying vacation. But Scott, it was great to have you back on the show, and thanks for being my partner in crime in this one, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
And for all of you out there, if you have questions for us, again, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Send them in. As we get closer to football season, we're obviously going to start getting into more of that. We'll have some football previews down the line, and any basketball news that comes up, we will be sure to bring it to you. But until then, for Scott Rich, for Jason somewhere on vacation, I am Donald Wine. This is the DBR Podcast, and now it is time for the Duke band to play us out and take us home.